What is going on, guys? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, as I said, we're going to be talking about heat mats and humidity domes. I was just starting some lettuce seedlings and I was reminded of this extremely common question that gets asked. And it's usually asked something along the lines of, I've got a humidity dome or I've got a heat mat, but I don't even know how to use it. Or should I be using a heat mat and a humidity dome to start my seeds? And so we're going to talk about all of that in today's episode. When you should be using one, when you should be using one over the other, could you be using both, should you be using none at all? All of that in today's episode. Let's go. So the first thing I want to cover is what are heat mats and what are humidity domes? Well, if you don't even know what these are tools that gardeners have used for many years to help increase their success when seed starting indoors. A heat mat is basically just a plastic or rubberized mat that has some heating coil running along the inside, and you will put your flat or your tray on top of that mat. And basically the heat will radiate up through the mat into the soil. And the theory is that when you do this, it'll warm the soil up and essentially help the seeds to germinate faster. Now, a humidity dome is what goes on top. A humidity dome, as the name would imply, just traps humidity. It helps prevent the soil from drying out too fast, and therefore it holds moisture near the seeds, helping them to germinate a little bit better. So heat mats and humidity domes can be used to increase success, but there's a lot of mistakes that are made when using those two, and that's what we're really going to cover, because there's a lot of seeds and a lot of instances where you don't need to use them at all, and you can actually cause yourself more harm than good, and sometimes even set back your garden because you're using them in the wrong circumstances. So the first thing I want to touch on are heat mats. Now, heat mats should only be used with seeds that require heat to germinate. For example, this lettuce, you would never want to use a heat mat on lettuce. Lettuce can germinate in soil temperatures that are 55 to 60 degrees, no problem at all. Even as low as 45 degrees, you can even have success with germinating lettuce seed. So you don't need to have soil that's 85, 90 degrees. That'd be too warm, and you're going to cause stress on your seedlings. Now, with something like a tomato or a pepper, these are ones that you can absolutely use a heat mat for. They like warmer soil, they're warm weather crops, and because of that, you can actually use a heat mat to warm the soil up and have success when germinating those seeds. Some other seeds that you don't want to use a heat mat for are basically anything that likes cold weather. So things like spinach, could be kale, broccoli. There's actually very few plants that will benefit from a heat mat. I would say about 80 to 85% of plants don't need a heat mat at all. So the other ones that you can benefit from a heat mat would be things like cucumbers, beans, tomatoes, peppers. Again, very few crops really need a heat mat. Now, the other question that gets raised is, what is the definition of need? Is that, do you need it at all times? And the answer is no. A lot of these warm weather seeds will germinate in soil temperatures that are between 70 and 75 degrees, basic household temperature. They don't need to be 85 degrees to germinate well. Now, it can speed up the germination. It can increase the rate at which they germinate. So rather than 7 to 9 days, it's more like 5 to 7 days. Are you really gaining that much time? If time is of the essence and you need to rush it, you can get a few extra days. But even with basic household temperature, even with the warm weather crops, you don't always need a heat mat. Now, another instance when you don't want to use a heat mat is once the seeds have already germinated. This applies to literally anything, whether it's a crop that you shouldn't have a heat mat on or a crop that you can benefit from having a heat mat. Once the seeds germinate, you always want to have the heat mat turned off. And the reason why is because the seeds will benefit from warm soil. They will germinate faster with warm soil. However, if you keep the heat mat on and the plants are already growing, you're going to be warming up the soil to a level that the seeds no longer are having a benefit. The seedlings themselves are going to be fleeing the warmth. Soil temperatures for tomatoes that get 80, 85 degrees is too warm. And so, yes, you're getting a benefit, but once that benefit has passed, it's important to turn them off. It's also going to increase the rate of evaporation. It's going to increase how much water leaves the soil. And so as your plant is growing, it's going to require more and more water to keep water in the soil, because the heat mat is basically just evaporating it as you're going. Heat increases evaporation. And then the third thing that heat mats can do is they can actually end up overheating. Some heat mats do have a thermostat, a built-in thermostat. However, some heat mats, most heat mats don't. And that means they basically keep warming until they hit a threshold, a maximum temperature. And that's generally around 80 to 85 degrees. Some even as high as 90 degrees. And I don't know about you, but as I said in our last video, if I was feeling hot, I'd take off clothes, right? Well, seeds can't do that. Like, I can't take off a hoodie, or I mean, plants can't take off a hoodie if they get hot, right? And I've got a t-shirt underneath. Well, if I still am hot, that t-shirt's coming off. And so plants can't do that. And all they can do is say, blah, and they just freak out and they get all leggy. They sometimes will die on you. And it's really a bad thing to leave a heat mat on for too long, especially when you don't need it. All right, and the final thing that I wanted to cover is one additional time when you could use a heat mat. So just like you use a heat mat to warm the soil to increase the temperature for things like tomatoes and peppers, you can use a heat mat if you're growing something like lettuce in an unheated garage. Lettuce will benefit from warmer soil, but the key is not getting it too warm. So if you're growing in, say, a garage that's 45, 50 degrees, having the soil warmed up will definitely help. And that's a time when you can use a heat mat on things like lettuce or cold weather crops. The other 80% of crops that you would normally not want to use a heat mat for, if the surrounding temperature is pretty cold, they can provide some benefit in that case as well. All right, now we're going to talk about humidity domes. So humidity domes usually come with most kind of starter packs. If you're going to the store and you're buying like a 72 cell tray, they generally will come with like a little plastic dome to go over top. Now, these are not bad. It's just like heat mats, they can be if you don't know how to use them. And so these can be a tool to help you, but they can also be a tool to totally ruin your seedlings. So we're going to talk about when you'd use these now. All right, so I'm going to give you guys a time when you would use a humidity dome, and then we'll talk about when you shouldn't use one. So the time when you should use a humidity dome is if you have really dry air. For those of you that heat a home with wood, especially wood heated homes are very, very dry. If you are a place that is in just a dry region of the world, like a desert region, that is also very dry. Generally, the humidity that you're looking for is right around 30 to 40% humidity to be acceptable. More than that can help you, but it's not going to help a ton. So this essentially is going to trap the humidity. It just literally sets on the tray and just traps the moisture inside of the tray. That moisture reduces evaporation, so there's more moisture near the seeds to help them germinate faster, because obviously seeds do need moisture to germinate. Now, once you have the humidity in here, it's really important that you take it off when the seedlings start to germinate. And that's the next time, that's kind of the next thing I want to talk about is the times you don't want to use a humidity dome. So we started these seeds and we got our lettuce seeds planted, and right now nothing is germinating. So it's in the process of sprouting. The seeds will benefit from excess moisture. They will benefit from having their soil damp longer, and that's going to help them germinate. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to leave the humidity dome on too long once the seeds germinate. See, if I put this on here, within an hour or two, I'll notice some condensation, and that's the trapping of the moisture. If I have plants in here, that moisture, that excess moisture in the air can become a bad thing. So what I'll do is basically I'll leave this on until I start to see sprouts. The moment I see one or two sprouts forming, I'll take it off and move it far away from my seedling tray. And the reason why is because a lot of gardeners will wait until their entire tray has sprouted, or they'll just leave it on forever, and that can cause a lot of problems. The reason why is that excess humidity actually can become a bad thing once you have plants growing. Things like gray mold, things like damping off, things like root rot can become very, very common if you leave the humidity dome on, because it's not allowing the airflow, it's not allowing the soil to breathe, And so you can have soil-borne problems, things like root rot, or you can have things like gray mold, which is a lack of airflow. Too much moisture near the leaves can actually breed things like gray mold. Also, things like damping off, the soil stays damp, and then what happens is the stem itself starts to get eaten away by bacteria, soil-borne bacteria, which are common, they're everywhere. Those eat away at the stem, and you'll notice your plant just kind of flops over flat. And so it's ideal to, as soon as you see one or two, take the humidity dome off. You're gonna benefit from that. Again, I wanna reiterate that in a place like this that has 35–40% humidity, you're not gonna benefit a ton from having a dome put over top of your plants. The only time you're gonna have a massive benefit is if you're in a really dry location or you're heating your house or wherever you're growing with wood. Wood heat is very, very dry. So consider putting also, another thing is just consider putting a humidifier in the room that you're growing in. That can add humidity to the entire location rather than a localized area, so that if the air is dry, you can still get the airflow, which is important. It's just really critical not to close off that airflow, because look at how confined this is. There's no airflow in here whatsoever. And so in the last video, we talked about having like a fan. A fan really helps to move that air around, helps to strengthen the seedlings. This is even more confined than the indoor space we're growing in. And so by taking that off and throwing a fan around here, putting a humidifier in, that's gonna get that airflow, it's gonna keep the humidity, and the plants are gonna be far better off because of it. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you did, make sure to throw a like up there. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're just getting started with our growing season. Believe it or not, it's not even February, and we're already getting plants ready to grow. And so hopefully you guys are getting excited, getting the spring fever. And so join the community. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you all on the next episode. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel. See ya.